chemical engineer, mother, and passionate writer. Today we sit with Meredith Kasian. Meredith has been crafting stories for as long as she remembers, but now she's taken the leap and published her debut book in record time. A fantasy author with a structured approach to storytelling, tons of inspiration, and big dreams for the future. She's here to share her journey, creative process, advice for new writers, and what it takes to bring a fantasy world to life. Welcome to Writing Inspiration with Markee Books. Hello, Meredith.
Hi, everyone. Hi, excited to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us today. So, Meredith, tell me, what is the story? How did everything start? What ignited this passion for writing?
It's hard to decide what ignited it because I've been writing for as long as I can remember, and I've been reading for as long as I can remember. But I think that probably reading is where it really started, and being as excited and as into reading as I have been for my entire life. I can remember even as young as first or second grade, always having a book with me wherever I go. And these are the days before Kindles and ebooks. So I'm literally toting bags of, chapter books for elementary school kids around everywhere I go. And so at some point, throughout my elementary school years, you have to work on writing projects. And I realized that I've enjoyed writing. And so I've always kind of had little stories popping in and out of my head, things that I felt like should be written down. And so I've attempted many stories over the years. Most of them are unfinished and probably never will be finished. But I do go back and steal ideas, names, places, things like that from stories and my newer stories that I write. So so it's been an entire life journey for me. Although it's funny, I have a degree in engineering, so I never thought that it was something that I would do as a career. And so it's kind of fun that now self-publishing is as big as it is, and it's something that people can jump into as a side career, as a hobby. And who knows what the future holds if that becomes a full-time thing for me.
That's great. So how long did it take you to get published?
So I started writing the Wielder's Discovery in November of 2023, and it published in November of 2024. So it was 3 weeks over exactly 1 year to the day that I started.
When did you finish the manuscript before the editing, the first manuscript?
The very first draft I finished in early January of 2024. So it took me about
3 months.
A little less than 3 months to write the whole thing. It was pretty quick.
Yeah.
I have yet to do another one in the same amount of time. But I think it's because I have, in the middle of writing book 2, I've also got edits for book 1. So I can't just dedicate solely to another book at this point. I also have everything else going on in the background.
Did you struggle in the process?
The writing or the editing?
Both.
I think I struggled more in the editing. The writing, I was so excited to get words down. I had my plot. I'm a plotter. So I had my plot mapped out in spreadsheets. That's the engineer side of me. And then was able to just get the words out. And I think once I started to dive into editing, that's when I realized, this is when it gets hard. This is when, and not that the writing part is not hard by any means, but the editing part is a different kind of beast. It is taking what's already written and making it better, fine-tuning it. Sometimes you have to delete things, which is the hardest for me personally, because I'm I wrote that, I really liked that scene, and now it doesn't actually serve a purpose. Or I've changed something that makes it irrelevant, and so it needs to completely go away. And so I think that the editing process has been it's fun in a way, but it's definitely where I struggled more.
It's actually happening to me right now because I had to. I was told that my book was too big. It's 500 pages.
Oh wow! That is long.
Yeah, and that I had to cut it out or divide it in another book. And I'm working on dividing the book in 2, which requires work too, because I need to add scenes and stuff to make it to make the book make sense.
Stand on its own.
And can hold itself on its own. because usually we prepare a climax for the end of one book, but because this was usually already one, then you need to make another one.
Yeah, it's tough. And then, if you end up scrapping anything from it too, I would recommend putting it into a separate file and keep it, like copy paste it over. Don't completely get rid of it forever, because you never know when that scene or that text could end up serving you in another book or later down the road too.
I agree. So what advice would you give like to new writers starting today, other than what you just said?
Yeah, that's a great one. And it's actually one that I got recently.
Is.
Yeah. That's one that every writer should be doing. My biggest piece of advice for new writers is always to take your time, especially the first time. You're going into something that's completely new. You're writing a book, you're editing a book, you're figuring out what types of edits you want to do, how long this process is going to take. And so don't set deadlines for yourself before you know more about how each step of the process is going to go. I've seen other writers that are friends of mine who they finish their first draft and they're like, I'm going to set a release date and get people really excited. And I'm like, but how long is it going to take for you to get it to a point where you're ready for it to actually be published? And if you set that deadline now, then you're committed to it, or you have to break hearts later, including your own. And so I always say, take your time. The first time, take your time. Once you've done it once, now for the second one, I have a better idea of how long each of those steps takes, where I can shrink the time frame, where I need to increase the time frame, and so I can better prepare the whole process and like the dates that I want to hit. But that first time, really just learn as much as you can, take it all in and absorb it all. Take your time.
I agree, especially because I have seen some books published by some new writers with clear grammar mistakes. And you ask, the first thing you ask yourself is, maybe this guy should have, check a bit more or take more time in the editing.
Yes.
Even maybe use a tool if he doesn't have help.
Yeah. Or it's, even if you can't afford a professional editor, there are so many people out there who will read your book for free as a beta reader. And just having a few extra eyes on it, like even if you just get 5 people to beta read your book, an extra set of eyes can pick up like grammar errors, missed punctuation, and plot holes too. Because it's unreal how many times I've read my own book and been like, how has this plot hole made it through this far? Or how has that period been missing for this many revisions? Like it just happens. But the more people that read it, the fewer those are going to be by the end.
Yeah. So, are you like working on another thing right now other than writing your book?
So I'm working on book 2. I'm just about to send it out for its first round of edits. So I'm finishing up my last, I actually printed it out and have it in a binder, and I read through it, and now I'm working on incorporating all the edits. I'm about a third of the way through that. And then it will go off to my editor. And while it's with her editor, I have kind of 2 projects that I'm toying with. I'm not sure which one I'm going to have to start with first. But I really want to write a novella set in the same world as this duology and use that as a reader magnet. So that's another good author tool, is to have a reader magnet to attach to your newsletter. So I want to use that as a reader magnet, and so I need to get that going. But I also have this second series set in a different world entirely that has been floating around in my mind for almost a year now, that is just dying to get out on paper. So it's going to just depend on where the creativity flows and in which direction it goes first. But I'm excited to get back to a blank page and drafting again come March. So that's what's coming up for me.
That's great. So are you planning to go to traditional publishing later?
Probably not. No, I like the control that I have with self-publishing. I like the flexibility that I have with it. I like that I'm in charge. Like I get to choose what I write and how much of it I write, and when I can publish, how often I can publish. So for now, self-publishing is working great for me. But who knows what the future holds? If things go really well and I was to be approached by a traditional publisher, I don't think that I would say no. But I'd have to really consider it.
Yeah, I agree. Was your work inspired by another author?
Not necessarily. I think I had most recently read, when I started writing The Wielder's Discovery, I had just finished reading the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. Like, finished, and then like a couple hours later started writing. And so, because I knew I just wanted to get that series over with. And so it was very fresh in my mind. And I think I may have accidentally drawn a lot of inspiration and elements of the world building from that series. But in terms of like the writing style and the actual plot and the characters, I pulled most of that out of my own head and my own life experiences.
Oh, wow, that's great. You mentioned you were a plotter. How do you outline everything?
Spreadsheets. I also mentioned I'm an engineer. I love a good spreadsheet. I found a spreadsheet template that it was out there as a freebie. I don't even remember where I found it at this point, but it uses the 3-act structure. So very similar to Save the Cat. And it gives you, within each of the 3 acts, you have 3 phases of the act, in which in each of those 3 phases, you have 3 different beats that you want to hit. And so there's 27 in total. And I used that to plot out my story. And that really helped move things along and help me figure out where the story needed to go. And when I wrote The Wielder's Discovery, it was the first time I had plotted from beginning to end, other than me coming up with an idea that said, I know how I want it to start and I know how I want it to end, but I have no idea how we're going to get there. And that's why my stories always fizzled and I could never finish them. But I found when I plotted it, and it was very clear in a structured way in that spreadsheet, what needs to come next and what the points are, it left room for me to pants and make things up as I went. But it also gave me that structure and that ability to see the end picture and finish the book in the end. So I figure if it's not broke, don't fix it. So I'm going to keep using that spreadsheet until I get to the point where I feel like I don't need it, or if there's another tool that comes along that I like, I can try that. But it's working really well for me now for 2 books and getting ready to start on a 3rd. So, yeah.
Actually, I was about to ask about that, because sometimes you like have a new idea and then it can affect the outline. For example, right now for the book I'm writing, my outline is completely different. I was going with the plan, but my editor kind of like told me, no, I don't like it. I had to change the order stuff. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does happen. Characters take up a mind of their own, or your editors will pick up on something. That's happened to me before too. My editor's like, this doesn't make sense. And I'm like, but I wanted it to be there, but you're right. It doesn't make sense with the story, or I need to change this. And so I try to keep my outlines a little bit flexible too, or keep them high level enough that if things like that come along, it doesn't interrupt the end goal and how we get there. It's just an extra detail along the way. But I love when the characters kind of take their own path, because I have an idea of what these characters want to look like when I am starting to plot. But once I get to writing them on the page, sometimes they become a very different type of character. Like maybe I meant for them to be a grumpy person, but they turned out to be more of the cinnamon roll, or I wanted them to be maybe a very wise elderly person, but they just like to crack jokes the whole time instead. And so you can't make up stuff like that until you're actually writing it. And so I try to leave a little bit of room for the grace of the pantsing that comes along with writing, while still sticking to the plot. But it's hard. Sometimes you get carried away doing other things.
Yeah. So do you have a story of how you named your book?
How I named it? Honestly, it just came to me. I don't have a great story for it. I really don't. And with the second one, I knew I wanted the structure to be the same. And so, the first one is The Wielder's Discovery. The second one is going to be The Wielder's Sacrifice. I knew I wanted it to be The Wielder's something. And as I was plotting it and figuring out what I wanted it to be, I was like, I've got this. I know what this is going to be. I think the only kind of cool thing about my titles is that they have more than one meaning. There's at least 2 meanings for each of them. And so it's been fun to hear what readers think they are as they go through, because a lot of times, at least what I meant for them to be is different than what the readers initially expect. And so it's kind of fun to hear their reactions to it and to see that on the reader side too. But yeah, no fun story to how I came up with it. It's just, it fell into my head one day.
Have you ever wanted to try like experimenting with other genres, very different from the one you're already doing?
Yeah, so I mentioned I've been writing stories for as long as I can remember, and I have written stories in probably most genres. I don't think I've dabbled much in sci-fi because that's, as much of a scientist as I am, that involves a little bit too much research. But I've tried like historical fiction, contemporary, chick lit, young adult, all that kind of stuff. Fantasy, though, is where I find I have the most fun with writing because there's no boundaries. I can do whatever I want. I can make up whatever I want. I'm literally the rule maker of that world. And so if someone is like, well, why did you do that? Or why did you pick that type of magic? Or why did you set it in that kind of setting? I'm like, well, because I wanted to, like literally just because I wanted to. And so I like having that freedom and that flexibility to make anything possible. So I've kind of thought about the idea of writing again now that I've figured out my process and I've gotten into publishing. Like, do I want to try to write in another genre? And really, I don't feel called to at this point. I feel like fantasy, romantic fantasy, is where I'm comfortable for now. And again, that could change in the future, but for now, I think I'm going to stick where I am.
Yeah, I get it. I haven't tried like to add more horror elements myself. I was never like used to do that, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that I can try.
Yeah.
But if I have to pick one genre I'm not comfortable at all, it will be comedy.
Yeah,
I
that's
I
fair.
I don't feel like a funny person in that
I'm not a funny
way.
person either. Once in a while, I can throw in a one-liner, but an entire book based on comedy, no.
No. Landing jokes every time it's an art.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It
I
really
don't
is.
I don't envy those famous comedians on movies.
No, no, they have a special skill that I do not have. So I'll leave the comedy to them.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, how do you manage the marketing and stuff? Do you have help?
I wish. I wish. I would love to find help. If anybody wants to help me, that would be fantastic. No, again, something in the future I really want to do is to be able to have somebody who can help me with the marketing, somebody who knows a lot more about it. I dabble a little bit here and there. I make all of my own content myself. I run my own social medias. I would like to explore ad campaigns. Ideally this year, we'll see if that happens. But I would love to find somebody who excels, or at least thinks they excel at book marketing, that would want to like step in and help. And that's we'll get there. I hope. I'm trying to focus. I know a lot of authors say the best marketing you can do is to write your backlist. Because nothing sells books better than having more books available. So I'm also thinking about that, and I'm like, all right, maybe right now I'll just do what I'm doing, try to build my backlist a little bit, and then once I get to a good point with my backlist, I can try to bring in another person to support me with marketing. But every day that I am like, what am I going to post on social media today, or what kind of content am I going to create today? I'm like, should I just find somebody to help me with that? So I'm most active on Instagram, a little bit on Threads. I have a TikTok, but as you know, in the United States, that's kind of a weird place right now. And so I'm not super on TikTok, and I'm not very engaged on there. So I don't have many followers. But yeah, Instagram and Threads are probably the ones that I use the most. A little bit of Facebook. I do have a Facebook account as well. So that's where I do most of my marketing, is just through my socials. And then, of course, my newsletter as well.
Okay. I want to ask, how do you stay creatively inspired?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's honestly through reading. I love to get new ideas from reading and seeing what other people are doing. because usually there's a little kernel of something somewhere that will spark a bigger idea in my head. And I'm like, how could I run with this and make this into a bigger thing? And not in a like plagiarizing way, but in a way that it's like exciting to see what other people are doing creatively and using that as a launch pad for my own creativity. But there are times, where you get kind of stuck with, you're plotting or you're drafting or whatever, and you're like, I hit a block. And so in those moments, I like to actually step away from reading, step away from writing. I'll do some podcasts, like listening to podcasts. I'll go on walks, try to get some exercise in and just like think about other things so that my mind tries to get totally clear of whatever else is like preventing me from focusing. And then come back in a couple of days and see if that has if that reset worked. So far it has. So sometimes you just need to step away from it a little bit to let that come back in. I think we can all agree that the blocks happen and that they're tough when they do.
Mm-hmm. So what are your plans for the future? Are you planning to go to an event to promote yourself or make a stand or a signing?
Yeah, so I have one planned. It actually hasn't been fully announced yet, but there will be one in April at a local bookstore here in Philadelphia. So if anybody's interested or local to the area, stay tuned to my social media or my newsletter for more information about that. And I'm hoping throughout the year to come up with a couple of more. I'd love to do like one signing a month. I have a book club that I'm going to be at in March. So I'm excited about that one. But yeah, it's, still kind of unfolding. I did 2 events in February. They were so much fun. And they kind of just got me hooked on the idea of really connecting with the readers in person and doing those types of events. So as of right now, no further plans past April, but open to new opportunities and seeing what's out there.
So can you share with us your social medias?
Yes. So my social medias, they're the same at every platform to make it nice and easy. So it's at Meredith Kasian author. So first name, last name, and then author. And that's where you can find me at all the platforms that I mentioned before.
Excellent. And on what platforms we can find your book?
Yes, it's on Amazon, and I also am wide. So you can only get the ebook on Amazon since I have it on Kindle Unlimited. But I have the paperback version available at pretty much any bookstore that you can think of. It's at Barnes & Noble, it's at Target, bookshop.org. I believe I've also seen it. It did make it through to Waterstones. I'm not sure what you have down there in South America in terms of bookstores, but at least all those stores have online shops as well that you can search through. And then there's a couple of local bookstores in the Philadelphia area that have stocked it as well if you wanted to go and find it in person. Some of them have signed copies, which is really exciting. I don't currently have any direct sales set up, but that's something that I'm hoping to get into in the future because I have an audio version coming. We just actually funded the Kickstarter for it today, which is really exciting. And the audiobook will be coming to the wide platforms later this summer. So probably between June, July, August timeframe. I'll make sure to communicate that out with my newsletter and my socials as well. But I do plan to sell that one direct, as well as having it on Amazon, Spotify, Libby, Libro, all of those. So that's exciting and coming soon.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Meredith. Well, I think that's all for now. Thank you for coming and thank you for this nice interview.
Thanks for having me. It was so much fun.
I'm happy to hear that. Thank you so much for joining us today in our episode of Writing Inspiration with Markee Books. Hope we see you again. Bye, Meredith.
Bye.